Great. We're pleased to introduce today Traci Barkley, who comes to us from the Prairie Rivers Network. And she's been with Prairie Rivers since 2005, right? And she's a water resources specialist. So she's going to be, well, she focuses mostly on working with municipalities and mining operations and industries to reduce water pollution in our local streams and rivers. So she's going to talk to us today a little bit about some of the impacts that coal mining operations have on our waterways, and also discuss some upcoming legislation that relates to water quality. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Traci. And thanks everybody for coming, and hopefully you'll have lots of good questions and comments for Traci afterward.
Great, thanks. Okay, can everybody hear me okay if I talk at this level? Okay, great. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today with you. Our organization was actually founded by a woman, so that makes it especially appropriate that I'm here with all of you today to talk about what our organization does, has been doing for the last 45 years, and is continuing to do in the future. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I actually, when I was talking to Lauren and Corey about what I wanted to talk about today, there's like so much that I wanted to bring. So I'm actually moving pretty quickly, and I would be happy to stay after for questions and answers and try and save some time at the end as well. But if I'm moving too quickly through something, please come up and talk to me afterwards. We also have a lot of literature on all of our different campaigns. So we have a basic brochure that talks about the basics of what our organization is and how important membership is. And of course, we'd like for all of you to become members if you can. We have newsletters that come out quarterly. So our latest one is up here. Here is our 2012 accomplishments, and it gives you an idea of who our staff are on the back. And then these are all sheets about our different campaigns. And so I'm going to walk through a little bit more just the breadth of the work that we do, and then focus specifically on the coal work that I do. And at the end, I'll give you an idea of what we were proud of this last year in this last legislative session, what to look for in the veto session this fall, and then what bills are being considered right now for introduction next spring. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and get started. So we are a nonprofit advocacy organization. We work with and on behalf of Illinois residents to protect clean water and healthy river systems. Our organization was started 45 years ago by a woman, Patricia Hannon. She was out along the Sangamon River in what is now Allerton Park, and got word that the Army Corps of Engineers was planning a reservoir to dam the Sangamon River and to plant a reservoir because the city of Decatur was growing so fast that they needed a new water supply. And for anybody who's been out by Allerton, who has enjoyed the Sangamon River, any of its segments, you know that that's really a treasured river system, and a lot of people, fish, and wildlife benefit from that system. And today we have Allerton Park that is now not flooded by a reservoir. So she ended up gathering signatures on a petition. It started with a very simple petition. It started with door-to-door knocking on letting people know what was planned, and brought about this groundswell of support for what she was trying to do in opposition of the project, and eventually the dam was stopped, and so the Sangamon River free flows today. With that, word spread that there was another reservoir that was being planned on the Middle Fork of the Vermilion River. Same thing, it was going to be a water supply and recreational reservoir. Same group of people, and now with some of our current board members gathered together and said, this is a terrible idea, we don't need a reservoir, this is a really treasured river again. And not only did they stop the dam, but they ended up getting national designation. It's now a National Scenic and Wild River, and that was with the help of Representative Johnson that was done. So it took a groundswell of grassroots support. It took legislators at the time. It took community leaders, and people really saying this is a bad idea and working together kind of at a feverish pace to get that done. That really moved, and actually I've got a couple more pictures. On the left are some of the original organizers. On the right were some farmers from Macon County that were opposing the dam. There was a lot of outreach and activism on campus, and then it ended up, a lot of times in suits and meetings, having these conversations as well. So that was our foundation, and that's very much the way we work today in all of these different avenues, working with different types of people in different positions to work towards protection of clean water. It has, we have evolved quite a lot. We went through several years where we were working specifically on landfill regulations and reform in Illinois. Had great success there, and now we have many of the protections that we need for municipal household garbage and also industrial waste due to some of those landfill regulations that were put in place. Then we went into more of our clean water work and again proposing some reservoir projects. And I don't have a map with me today, but at one point there were dozens of reservoirs planned for the state of Illinois for damming up our major rivers, and we're a very river-rich state. And then the idea was public water supply and recreational facilities, but you can see now, without any new dams for how many years, we're doing just fine with our water supply right now. We have plenty of recreational opportunities, and many of them exist on the rivers that are free-flowing today. So our work is built on our foundations, and it's broadened quite a bit. We have 3 programs that we work within. The Clean Water Program, that's what I work within. And we work with our strongest piece of legislation since 1970 for environmental protection of waters, the Clean Water Act. So we work to make sure that it's implemented appropriately and enforced properly. We work on improving water quality standards that are set to protect the existing uses of waters and limit pollution. We work to reduce pollution from cropland and factory farms. And we work to reduce polluted runoff from towns and cities. Our Healthy Stream Flow and Habitat Protection Program, really, this is a difficult program to work within because really in our state we have all the way from these little headwater streams. In fact, Champaign County is we're at the headwaters of 4 different major river systems. So it means working with landowners on voluntary practices to reduce runoff or to improve riparian restoration along the stream restoration. All the way up to the Mississippi River. We have 2 staff members that are working on the Mississippi River looking at Army Corps of Engineers projects, looking at restoration, trying to get appropriate funds in place, pushing for strong policies and legislation that don't see the rivers only as a barge or shipping industry avenue, that aren't only looking at it as industrial wastewater conveyance, that they're trying to look at the river as an ecosystem, a place for recreation, a place that people, a place of history and great cultural significance. So this program really takes the gamut from these itsy-bitsy little streams and working with adjacent landowners to working at the federal level for our major Ohio, Wabash, and Mississippi rivers. We work on invasive species control, and I'm not going to get into that because it's a hard thing to say in like 2 sentences. But we're working on the Asian carp issue, and we have a great handout up here, and actually a petition that we'd like you to sign if you're willing. The short of it is that we've got a major threat that has to the Great Lakes that have used Illinois rivers and streams, and they're Asian carp, they're poised to enter the Great Lakes system. And anything we do to protect the Great Lakes will also protect our rivers and streams down the road. And if you remember, 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, we had the zebra mussel that came from the Great Lakes through that same channel. So we're working in a kind of 2-directional way to stop this, this connection that is allowing invasive species to move and damage our waterways. And then wetlands protection. We have so few wetlands left in the state of Illinois, but they're really important for flood protection, for cleaning of water, for wildlife habitat. And so those few remnants that are in place are still being threatened by constant development. And so we work through permitting programs and voluntary wetland protection programs as well. And then finally, our river stewardship and awareness program is really across the board in terms of this is part of everything that we do, teaching people about how important rivers and streams are, how important our clean water systems are, making sure that people connect with rivers and streams. And I don't have them out right now, but I have a number of handouts. If you're interested in all the different ways you connect with water, whether it's visiting a streamside site, going to a place of cultural significance, fishing, paddling, swimming, all of these different ways. Part of the way we get people to care about water is by providing opportunities for them to connect with it in the first place so they care and want to do something to protect these systems. And then we also, unfortunately, are doing more of this work now where we're advocating for our state regulators to get appropriate funding because our state EPA and state DNR, who are supposed to be the stewards of our environments, they're constantly being cut on their funding. And so we end up in Springfield and talking to to taxpayers quite a lot about how we need appropriate funding for them to do their job, because the funding is, they're understaffed, they're overworked, the morale is terrible, and they really are the first line of defense, sometimes the first and the last line of defense on protecting our waters. So that, I'll talk a little bit more about that with the DNR funding fees bill. So we operate in a lot of different ways, and I've touched upon some of them. A lot of what I do is I'm in meetings a lot. I write a lot of letters. I review stacks of plans and proposed permits. And a lot of times it's looking through what's being proposed and looking for opportunities to improve it, saying this isn't aligned with our law, and writing letters, asking for hearings, making phone calls, and then also trying to get people on the ground, messaging to those people on the ground about what the issue is and how they can get involved to advocate for clean water. We participate in stakeholder groups, we write letters, meet with decision makers, all the way from the permit writers at Illinois EPA all the way up to the governor's office, sometimes municipal leaders. Sometimes people from the Army Corps of Engineers, it might be a farmers group. There are a lot of different ways that we can work with people to show that there are options for reduced impact and for improved treatment. And this is all. And then we work with environmental lawyers, so we do have a staff attorney with Prairie Rivers Network, but we work with a lot of law and policy centers and environmental law clinics through universities. So we try, because we're a nonprofit group, to get as much pro bono legal assistance as we can. It's extremely expensive. It's hard to fundraise for because we never know what's going to be coming down the pike and what we're going to have to challenge. And we really try to do as much as we can before getting to that state. But we do have lawsuits. We just filed a lawsuit over groundwater contamination from coal ash sites against Midwest Generation. We appeal permits, and sometimes that's the only avenue. Sometimes we're pushed to that if other avenues don't work. And then I think sometimes the most important thing that we do is informing our membership and providing opportunities for people to advocate on their own and on behalf of their communities. So we pride ourselves as an environmental organization for basing our work on sound science. That's fortunate for us here in Champaign-Urbana because we have the state water surveys, we have the university, we have connections with a lot of state and federal agencies. And we have 3 scientists on staff. I'm an ecologist. We have 2 biologists. We have a couple people with law and policy backgrounds. We have a couple of organizers. But the science part is really, that ends up getting us much further in the process because we know how to look in the literature, we know what doesn't make sense, we know what the opportunities are. And it's a certain amount of work also to keep in touch with those researchers and practitioners to find out, what is possible and why isn't this the best available technology or best practice anymore. So these are, I'm not going to go through them, but we look in a lot of ways at, what the proposed project would do in terms of water quality or water quantity. Are there sensitive mussels or fish that would be impacted? What are the baseline conditions to begin with? Because a lot of times when a project is proposed, you'd be amazed at how little that part of the permit application is that says what's there to begin with. And of course, you can't measure impact if you don't know what's there to begin with. And sometimes the project would never even be approved if you knew that there was an endangered mussels there or a whole community relied on that for their swimming hole or for paddling opportunities. So I'll go through these quickly, but these are the federal partners we work with, from Geological Survey to Army Corps of Engineers, EPA, state partners. And actually, more and more, at least with the work that I'm doing on coal, we're working with the Attorney General's office because they know we have big problems in our state and are working on reform. Academic, I mentioned the Prairie Research Institute, which is how all of our surveys are organized now. The State Natural History Survey, State Water Survey, State Geologic Survey. We're fortunate at the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center down in Alton, situated on the Mississippi River. That's a lot of big river researchers that are there, and we serve on their board, help advise them on Illinois issues and what we think they should be focusing their research efforts on, and then state and private institutions. We partner with a lot of environmental organizations from Sierra Club to Faith in Place to Chicago-based organizations like Alliance for the Great Lakes and Open Lands. We're starting to work more with public health advocacy groups because in the end, this is a lot of what it's all about. And they're getting wiser about how that connection between health and environment, and are starting to get more staff and funding to be able to partner with environmental groups. And then the private sector, we work with consultants, we work with engineering firms, and that's often, if we are challenging something, if we're trying to make recommendations, often we're hiring those people to help, put the best project forward. Or we're meeting with those people that are advocating on behalf of, say, municipality. If there's an expanded sewage treatment plant, and we're saying, you don't need to send all this to the water. What about reusing this wastewater within your community? It's really the engineers that from their staff that we're sitting down at the table with and thinking outside of the box about what the options are. So let me just check on time. Okay, good. I work on coal issues. I used to work only on permitting, water quality standards throughout the state of Illinois. And when I started looking at our water pollution discharge permits in Illinois and enforcement and compliance rates with those permits, there was one industry that stood out that was just obviously getting a pass. They were blowing their permit limits. We were seeing problems on the ground at these sites, and really no enforcement of those permits was taking place. And people in water was getting damaged. So I started the coal program for Prairie Rivers Network 2 to 3 years ago, which meant taking me off of all this other water work and focusing on at that time what was looked at as a small sliver of what was threatening Illinois waters. And I think what we've realized since then is that our state has a lot of pressure because of coal. It is a strong industry in the state of Illinois. 2/3 of our state is underlain by coal. There's a lot of pressure on the Illinois coal basin to increase coal extraction. One, because of the pressure on mountaintop removal in Appalachia right now. But there's also Illinois coal is able to be, now with air pollution technology, what Illinois, the dirty coal that Illinois is able to be burned more broadly now. So I'll unpack that a little bit more for you. So Illinois coal is high in sulfates and high in salts, although it has a high energy value. So power plants want to burn it because it produces more fuel per unit. But it wasn't able to be burned for many, many years because the Clean Air Act came into place. And burning Illinois coal with the way the power plants were built didn't allow them to meet the limits set by the Clean Air Act. But now, because of some amendments that require some retrofits on some of those power plants, including scrubbers and mercury controls, those technologies keep more of the particulate matter and more of the pollution out of the air. So a lot of these power plants are going back to burning some of the dirty coal because they have a technology that prevents a lot of those impurities, pollutants from going out into the air. So we've seen a resurgence in Illinois of using Illinois coal. We also have a very favorable regulatory environment for coal. And it's relatively accessible. So we have strip mines in west central Illinois and southern Illinois, and then we have underground mines in central and southern Illinois. So I wanted to make sure to cover a couple different parts of the coal life cycle. So not only do we have a lot of coal mining in our state, we have a lot of coal burning in our state. And in fact, we have nearly 50% of our energy comes from coal. We have 22 coal-fired power plants in the state. And with that comes the waste product that's left behind after burning coal, which is the coal ash. And so a lot of that coal ash is stored at power plants. But we also have this unique system where, because we're mining coal and pulling it out of the ground, we're shipping a lot of that out of state. So a lot of the coal that we're burning in Illinois is not from Illinois. A lot of the coal that we mine in Illinois is exported to other states. In fact, a lot of it now is going to China. And well, we have rivers for barges that allow for easy exit of coal and easy shipping around the world. And they don't have the air pollution control there, so dirty coal doesn't, it's cheap and it's easy to burn. So the issue with extracting coal out of the ground is that it's coming out of the ground it's being shipped by rail to power plants and manufacturers, often out of state. And then those rail cars are coming back with coal ash that's being disposed of in our mines. So we have not only coal extraction, coal burning, but we also have coal ash disposal, more so than other states because we have it at both ends, the mining and the burning. So I wanted to just unpack what this looks like. And unfortunately, we have 3 active cases that we're working on in East Central Illinois right now. One, I want to walk you through a problem at old coal mine that's being reclaimed. The second is proposed underground coal mine in Vermilion County that we're working on. And the third is a coal-fired power plant, the Dynegy Vermilion plant, that's now closed, but has coal ash contamination problems that we're working on. So Murdoch Mine is in Douglas County, and let's see, I think if I can show. So this was an underground mine, but what happens is they pull the coal out of the ground, they crush it, they wash it, and they send the coal to the power plant or manufacturer wherever it's going. So this mine closed in the early 90s, and what was left behind was, let's see if I can get this to work. Oh, it's not showing, but so there's a lot of like rock that comes up with the coal that's not actually coal, and that's called coarse refuse. And so that has to go somewhere. So that's one waste product. And then after you wash the coal, there's a slurry that's left behind. So all the fine particles that are broken off, mixed with the water, make kind of a paste. So that's the coal slurry. So this is where some of the old coarse refuse was stored. And this is a large pit. It looks flat because it's on the screen, but the walls are 75 to 80 feet high. And so they build these impounding walls to create an above ground pit for storage of the slurry. So this is common with most mines in Illinois. And on the right, you can see that there's some exposed coal waste, and some has been covered with soil and vegetated and is considered reclaimed. It's not been done properly, and there's leakage on the site, which I'll show you in a minute. In acid mine runoff, what happens is you end up exposing some of those coal particles. It becomes exposed to the air and water, and it allows it to break down, release pollutants. And you end up having acidic water and heavy metals be released as a result of the process, and salts as well. So then in the impoundment, what's left behind is the slurry itself, but then that's a huge footprint. I mean, that's probably maybe 90 acres. So just in itself, just having water from rainfall enter that mixed with the slurry, you're just creating more and more of a waste product. So they have to have a permit that allows them to discharge little by little into an area stream. So kind of the scar that's left behind from coal mining is a problem in itself. Reclamation is supposed to take care of that and restore it to something similar to the previous use. They're supposed to be, whether it's ag or meadow, grassland, forest usually is a larger investment that these coal mines don't choose. But what the operators of this mine, this mine sold to a company in Michigan called Alpena Vision Resources. And really what they're doing with the site is they're using it for waste management. I look at them as waste management brokers. So there's a bond on this site, over $1 million. Once they reclaim it, they'll get that $1 million. But it's a job. It's a job that they have to take on for years and years. What they decided to do is make more money off the site by storing and disposing of other waste products at the site. So that whole pit, the whole slurry impoundment, they have permits to fill with sewage solids from municipal sewage treatment plants, including our own. They have permits to dump coal ash in there, lime sludge from water treatment facilities, grain residue from Tate and Lyle and ADM. And the idea was that they have this big hole to fill. They'll just take all these waste products and fill it.
Who gives them the permit?
Well, that's what's interesting about this, and that's why this is under investigation and actually now is an enforcement action on it. So they actually have a permit from DNR, Office of Mines and Minerals, for the reclamation of the site. They also have a permit from Illinois EPA for their discharges. But there's a lot of gray area there that wasn't covered. And so when we started looking at what I'm going to talk about in a couple minutes, this proposed mine over in Vermilion County, one of the residents said, well, I just don't want my backyard to look like Murdoch. And it's like, what's Murdoch? So I went out and drove and checked it out and saw this huge pile and saw acid mine runoff on the side and looked at the stream. There are terrible conditions in the stream. And so we started investigating it over the last 2 years, taking pictures, doing water sampling, and feeding all this information to Illinois EPA, saying, please get an inspector out. We knocked on doors, talked to all of the residents, and the residents said, the agencies aren't going to do anything. We've been calling for 5 years, because they had been dealing with fugitive dust problems. Every time coal ash was dumped, there were clouds of coal ash. There were odor problems with the sewage solids. There were people worried about their drinking water. Because what's unfortunate about this site is there's a shallow sand and gravel aquifer. And a quarter a mile down gradient from this site, that's where 3 residents were getting, from a well that's 35 feet deep. That's where their drinking water is coming from. So we started documenting all of this and getting the agencies involved. And I think I've got, if you can see back here, on the left side, it doesn't show up so well here, but the coal ash ends up creating pretty terrible conditions. So you end up having some algae, which is fed by the nutrients from the sewage sludge. The coal ash is contributing sulfate. So you can't see it, but there's purple in there, and that's sulfur-reducing bacteria. And that's a sign that there's a problem. There's coal ash discharges in the left picture. On the right side, where some of their reclamation practices have failed, you see acid mine runoff in one of their streams. So the kind of first stage when we were looking at, the problems seemed to be coming from coal ash and coal ash discharges. And that's what the neighbors were concerned about, is these huge clouds of coal dust. But then it really started changing to more of a sewage problem. And they were taking sewage sludge from Champaign, Urbana, and it's a legitimate practice. They were permitted to do it, but the site operators were not managing it properly, and they were allowing it to be stockpiled. So there were huge odor problems, and when it would rain, it would flush all this into the streams. So on the left, you can see the whole stream is just choked with algae, a couple different colors algae. When we went back later, we saw the sewage fungus was growing on it, which is really, that's the big red flag that, okay, this is sewage related. There's solids in clumps under the stream. So we took water samples. I took lots of pictures. I sent this to the agency, and also started sending all this to the AG's office. And the residents started calling the AG's office. The residents started calling their state representative, Chapin Rose, and really starting to bang the drum a little louder, realizing we've dealt with a lot of problems over the last couple of years, but this is getting worse and worse and worse, and these are out-of-state operators that obviously are not taking care of us. So what it ends up meaning is the residents that are nearby have their groundwater at stake. There's in-stream problems. This little stream is a feeder stream to what eventually becomes Charleston's drinking water supply. There's air quality issues from just these putrid odors that residents were smelling, as well as the fugitive dust. So I think I've already gone through all the things that we did to help this case. But I'm pleased to report now that the AG has filed an enforcement action. In fact, actually, the Illinois EPA had a problem even finding these operators to begin with. But then they filed this. They're meeting and trying to find ways to remedy the problem. And we'll see. It goes before the Illinois Pollution Control Board, and we'll see if there's fines or if there's required cleanup, what sort of restitution there'll be for the residents, because this has been a problem for years and years for them. And really, we don't know what sort of legacy problem it's going to be for them, if their groundwater is contaminated, if this will continue to leach into the ground, if they don't clean it up properly. So this is just one of those, it's like the worst of the worst, where you just see that enough people were not doing their jobs and the residents weren't getting listened to, and it does take people sometimes standing up and connecting those dots and saying, okay, this is a problem that needs to be addressed. This is just a list of stakeholders, all the way from the residents in the area to the Champaign Sanitary District, because then we went and talked to them about, what are your options? You have to stop sending your sewage here. These people are suffering, and this is, the operators aren't managing appropriately. So with any issue, there's a lot of people that either serve to gain or serve to lose. So the next issue, which really, our involvement in this is what got us involved with the Murdoch issue. In Vermilion County, there's a proposed underground mine. It's being proposed by a company called Sunrise Coal out of Indiana. And it's the orange boundary is what's called the shadow area. So that's the boundaries of where the coal will be extracted from underground. And the red area is the surface facilities, and I'll show you what that means. So this is a sister mine in Carlisle, Indiana, that's operated by the same operators that would open up this coal mine. So you can just see, it's very similar to here where you have patchwork of farmland, small rural communities, and then this is what the surface of the mine would look like in that agricultural landscape. So as I mentioned with the other site, you have a coal washing operation. So they pull the coal out of the ground on a conveyor belt, they crush it, they wash it, they centrifuge it, kind of spin the water out of it, and then the coal ends up being transported. In this instance, it would be a railroad spur to a more major line. And then the coal slurry would be stored in these large above-ground impoundments. Again, there's coal waste disposal, so all of that rock that comes up, all those impurities have to have a place. So here's high-quality farmland that would be converted to coal waste disposal. Here's huge coal slurry ponds, sometimes up to hundreds of acres of this being stored there. I think they would be required to use a liner to protect underlying groundwater, but there's always a concern of having, this stuff is not, once it's there, it's not moving. It is going to be a disposal site into the future. And coal slurry has high salts, heavy metals. If you have a high hazard dam that's holding that back, anyone that's down gradient, if there's a breach at some point, that's a whole lot of weight and a whole lot of waste that threatens that community when really, these are areas that have been farmland for 6, 7, 8 generations. And then there's always a concern of mine runoff. So when you have some of those exposed coal particles exposed to the air and the water and not handled properly, like at this site, this is the sister mine, and these are aerial photos that we took. That's a problem. When you see that bright orange, that is a bright orange flag saying this is not being handled properly. So the other thing that we always are concerned about is how are our regulators doing. As I mentioned, the reason we even started doing this work is because we saw our regulators were not doing what they were supposed to be doing in holding these mining operations accountable. They sign the documents. They have approved permits that say we will not release this amount of pollution, and there's penalties if you don't. But a permit's only as good as its enforcement. So if it's not being enforced, and that signal is out there to the industry, they're going to keep doing it because it saves money in the long run if they don't have to implement their best management practices, if they don't have to keep things clean. So we have an enforcement case actually against this mine. 621 violations of the Clean Water Act. In their 9 years of operation, only 1 month have they been in compliance. So we filed, it was overfiled by the AG's office, and actually the compliance record has gotten worse since these enforcement actions. So this is, we point to this and say, okay, residents that are in support of this mine, are you ready to gamble like this? Because really, if you're counting on the state regulators to do their job, the track record's not good. And there's a multi-step process. It's in place there for a reason, but if you're worried about your drinking water supply, for example, it's a long time before that's remedied.
Tracy, is that Murdoch or this is where's this site?
Well, so the pictures I'm showing you are of Carlisle Mine in Indiana, but it's the exact same plan for what's being proposed at what's called the Bulldog Mine in Vermilion County. So the things that we're concerned about, and we're working a lot with residents, because right now there's a permit application's been filed, but we aren't into the depths of the paperwork yet. Right now it's really working with the public to inform them of, when a coal mine comes to town, these are all the things that come with it. This is what's being proposed. One of the, I'm not sure if the big thing with a mine that washes its coal is its water. So it can take anywhere from 500,000 gallons a day up to 2 million gallons per day. And we're not, this area, which is Homer, Ogden, Fairmount, Allerton, Seidel, that region, this is what their groundwater looks like. I don't know if you can see. So really, the mine is being proposed for right here. And all of these are shallow sand and gravel aquifers, which are not high producers of water. They're shallow and sometimes not strong producers. And then over here is the Muhammad aquifer. So this is, there's not really water there to be spending on washing coal. Anyway, the company is proposing to pump from wells that exist near the community of Ogden. So the community of Ogden is very concerned about what this is going to do to their water supply. There's also a proposal to pump water from the Salt Fork of the river. We're concerned about that because that system, even though it gets a lot of wastewater discharge from our sanitary district, and there's pretty steady base flow, it fluctuates. And I don't think this graph really does a good job, but it does fluctuate in this last summer, especially in the drought conditions. It wasn't moving, and it's shallow. So you talk about taking 500,000 to million and a half gallons per day. You just think, okay, the Salt Fork is heavily used by fish and wildlife. We have sensitive species in there. It's a recreation. There's a lot of people that really value that river. So is this the way we want our water to be used, as washing coal? And then the other part is, the discharges that come from the slurry impoundment have to go somewhere as well. And what's being proposed right now is to send it into the Salt Fork River, a tributary of the Salt Fork. And the problem with that is that the village of Oakwood draws their drinking water supply from the Salt Fork River. So same thing, they right now don't have the decision. They will never be the decision makers on whether this mine comes or not. They won't have any, they can participate like I will at a hearing and say, listen, we draw our drinking water supply, we can't afford to upgrade our system, we're concerned about this, but they have no part in whether this actually happens or not. They will be the recipients of the wastewater if it comes to pass. So there's concern there, not only for the drinking water, but we also have E&T species in the Salt Fork. In fact, I don't know if you saw in the News Gazette over the summer that there was this large transplant of this endangered mussel species from Pennsylvania because the conditions are right in the river, the quality is good, and it used to be that mussel was more abundant in the river system. So that says we have something to treasure, and it's really not a place where we want to be taking water out or putting wastewater back in. And then the other thing you always have to be concerned about, now that we know about Murdoch and these other sites, is anytime you open up a hole in the ground, it's possible that coal ash will go back in, or in the instance of Murdoch, these other industrial and municipal wastes. So it's something that the people in that community need to be thinking about as they're pushing for this mine to come. Do you want the increased road traffic and noise? Do you want coal waste to be left behind? Do you want your water supply, which isn't overly abundant, to be used for washing coal? It's a lot more than just a hole in the ground and underground mining, which is a lot of time what the companies would like you to think, that we're just going to pull it out. In fact, they'll tell you, in the leasing operations, they'll say, you'll never even know we were here. And in fact, we're going to pay you. We'll leave some money. You'll get the royalties and you'll get the signing bonus for signing the lease. But we know from looking at these coal mine operations that there are no coal boom towns, right? I mean, that's you look and you realize, there's nothing great that's left behind. In fact, there are resources that are extracted, and there might be jobs that are created in the process, but these mines are operating for 10 to 30 years. And for a village like Homer and Ogden, and they have to think about, is this something that we want as part of our long-term economic legacy? So I think I've already gone through this. We're going through fine-tooth comb with all the technical parts of this. We've hired lawyers to look at who has legal rights to the water, and we're organizing stakeholders and helping them do their door-to-door campaign and have the information that they need to make a responsible decision. So it's 12:43. I'm going to just quickly go through this because I want to get to the legislation and leave some time for questions. The last thing is that we have the Diane G. Vermilion Power Plant, so that's just outside of Danville. It was mothballed in March of 2001, and they decided to close in November of 2011. So the thing that's interesting about this site is that they have 3 coal ash pits. So this is the middle fork of the Vermilion River. And they have 3 ash pits that were built in the floodplain of the river. And 2 of them are not lined, and they're actively leaching into the groundwater. And 1 of them is leaching into the river. And then the 3rd one is lined, but it's still in the floodplain. So now that we know that this is closed, and we realize, okay, you've got problems with 2 out of 3. And looking at that river and knowing about river dynamics, that river is going to move, and it's going to keep flooding. And to have big toxic waste pits in the floodplain is not good long term. So And we know from one of our board members that paddles this frequently, he took pictures of this. This is one of the walls of the ash, one of the leaking ash ponds, where they had fabric put in place and steel gabions to try and keep the wall in place. But it's, the river is actively working on it. So this is some of the orange leachate that's coming from that site. And then here are some gabions that they put up as a structural control to try and keep some of that waste in place. But it's not working, it's crumbling. The tree roots are exposed and the trees are now dying there. So this is a national scenic river, heavy recreational use. You have sensitive ENT species there as well. There's several bald eagle nests along there. We know the Middle Fork is a jewel in our area. So it's not something we want to just be the recipient from the slow leakage of coal ash pollutants. And I should mention, if I haven't before, coal ash is heavy in salts and heavy metals. And they're more concentrated because some of it is taken out in the washing process, some of it is put out in the air during the burning process, and it's what's left. So we have been documenting this pollution. We've been talking to Illinois EPA saying, when this plant closes or if it closes, we need to talk about this. Now we know that it is closed, and what the company has proposed to do is just put a cap on those ponds as part of their closure plan. But we know from the flooding of the river and because of the connection through the groundwater that there's still an avenue for that pollution to get into the river. So even though it's expensive, there are examples throughout the nation of other sites where the coal ash, because of situations like this, either built in wetlands or in floodplains, where they've actually had to remove the coal ash and put it in a high and dry spot. And so that's what we're pushing for. We worked with a lawyer to design a lined landfill on site at Dynegy. We've submitted the plans to Illinois EPA, and our next step is really to reach out and work with all the stakeholders and say, we need to all get at the table and work in a proactive way to close this properly. There's a lot of legal reasons why they are going to have to do more of what they're proposing, but what we're trying to do right now is pull everyone together and work for the people that are using this river right now. So, the stakeholders really include the National Park Service. DNR owns all the land around that Dynegy site. There's Kickapoo State Park there, Middle Fork State Fish and Wildlife Area. You've got a lot of users, a lot of hunters, anglers, and so we're hoping that this can be a model site for closure. So when working with existing rules and regulations doesn't work, implementing and enforcing what we already have, sometimes we have to work towards new legislation. It's not something, we are a river organization, we work on clean water issues, so it's not every session that we're actively working on something with us in the lead. Often we're supporting our partners with what they're working on, knowing that at some point, it takes a network in that way also. So we're a member of the Illinois Environmental Council, and they are really an umbrella organization that works with all of these environmental and public health advocacy organizations to push for strong bills at the state level. So we directly lobby, we work on outreach education, we support our partners' efforts in that. So in 2012, the one thing that we were heavily involved in is it's called a CAFO permit fee bill. Factory farms in Illinois for livestock operations don't have, most of them don't have to have permits for operations because they don't expect to have discharges, but for those that do expect to have discharges, they have a permit, but there have never been any permit fees. So this was an obvious one, like, all right, they have to pay their fair share because there's a cost to government to reviewing the application, implementing and enforcing it. So we did have a success that requires factory farm owners to pay their fair share of getting the permit in place. The plastic bag bill was not us in the lead, but working with partners. That would have removed the municipal regulation of plastic bags, and so that was stopped. And then Leucadia, I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but it was a coal gasification plant that would have required Ameren and Nicor customers to pay a large portion of this coal gasification facility to be built over the next 30 years. So fortunately that was stopped because that's really, there were a lot of people that weren't in support of this that would have been paying the bill in the long run if it would have. So these are all things that happened this last spring that we're happy happened. So the veto session's coming up. It's after Thanksgiving. There's 2 weeks, November 27th through 30th and December 4th through 6th. And there are a few things coming up in that. So hydraulic fracturing is a technique that's used to extract natural gas. It uses high volumes of water and some chemicals to really stimulate natural gas from being released from the ground. So Prairie Rivers and Partners, really Faith in Place is in the lead on this, are working towards a moratorium on hydraulic fracturing because our state doesn't have the proper rules and regulations for the techniques that are being used right now. So we have rules and regulations for oil and gas extraction in Illinois, but nothing like the level that's being proposed right now. We don't have these operations, the large-scale operations in Illinois right now, but we know that the industry is moving in, and we want to make sure that our state has the proper rules and regulations in place beforehand. So this is something that came up last spring and is in negotiation right now. And it has a lot of 27 co-sponsors in the House. The other is funding for DNR. I mentioned that at the beginning of the talk that they really need increased fees just to keep up with their current operations, and that's not even to add their staff back in that they've lost over the years. So this is a bill that increases fees across a lot of different user groups as state parks and waterways. And so this, I hope, we have the support now. We didn't. We were just a little bit short in the spring, and I'm hoping this fall that this will get passed. The other is a renewable energy portfolio standard. So this is something where, when you have a renewable energy portfolio standard, it says how much of your energy should be coming from renewables. And we have a 25 by 25 renewable energy portfolio standard right now, but there are constant threats to that. So we're hoping that this will be bolstered this fall. Mm-hmm.
What is 25 by
25%, 25% of our energy should come from renewables by the year 2025. So it's just a steady increase of, what's being produced and what our purchasing power is. So then finally, so in 2013, this, a lot of groups are coming out with just their ideas. It's still pretty early. Some bills are starting to be drafted. Some of them are just ideas and are being vetted right now. But we're looking at, our organization is looking at improved participation in mine permitting, a severance tax or increased fees for mining, knowing that that's really not on par with other extractive industries in other states here in Illinois. Composting for schools and farms, tax credits for greenhouses, pesticide spray limits that would protect adjacent landowners, labeling of genetically modified food, and clean disposal of household paint. So these are the things that right now are being vetted for potential bills next spring. And I know that's a lot, but are there questions? Debbie?
Do you, when you work through laws and agencies, so maybe this isn't relevant to Prairie Rivers, but when we talk about these things, when we need the coal, we've got good coal in Burnsville. And as one of our members, Sherry, would have said, if we'd made the laws tough enough earlier, we could have been burning our coal a long time ago. And you're saying we now have that. But do you see that technology is going to catch up to do something with coal ash and some of these other extras that we get from our minerals?
Well, in terms of coal ash, we already have what we need. It's just a matter, we have the technology. Right now, household garbage is handled in a more responsible way than coal ash because all landfills that are being built are required to have liners, groundwater monitoring program, really stringent site characterization to make sure that you're not putting it where the waste is going to be in touch with the water table or in a floodplain. Coal ash, a lot of the places that they are right now were just bad ideas to begin with. But there's really nothing on the books that prevents them from doing it all over again. And we're continuing to use these ash pits that are in floodplains, that are old quarries where are constantly filling up with groundwater. That's an example from Joliet. So yes, for coal ash, for example, we can from now on, landfills that are lined, that are high and dry should be built. So that's it. It's just a matter of changing the regs. What's happening though, that's not going to happen at the state level. It's happening at the federal level, and EPA has proposed new regulation for coal ash, but they're getting torn apart by Congress right now on whether they even have the authority to regulate at the federal level. Because you can imagine the states want control over how the industry is regulated. Right, so that's our point. And then, really, we've gotten feedback from people that are behind Leucadia and Tenascus, saying, you guys are an environmental organization. Here we have cleaner coal burning facilities. Why aren't you behind this? And for us, we look at it and say, this is, it is a step in the right direction when you put those air pollution controls in place and we're using a different technology. But when we look at coal, we look at the whole life cycle of coal. And most of these facilities had something written in that required that the coal come from the Illinois coal basin. So we're looking at that being increased pressure on mining in our state, and until we have the right regulations. And actually, it's not even additional regulation. It's just implementation, enforcement of what we already have. And that's a cultural shift that we're working on.
So would you speak to that about this mine with 618 violations or something, and then just no enforcement? What's going on at the state level? And also this other board that something has to go in front of. Who makes up that board? Are they political appointees?
They are political appointees. It's the Illinois Pollution Control Board. There's 4 on the board right now. I think there's supposed to be 6. And they hear all of the cases, and they are supposed to first weigh adherence to our pollution control laws, but they also are supposed to be considering the economics. So, that ends up being a struggle when the economy is what it is today. And if we're asking for, better and advanced technology, that's, that is looked at as an expense for the company. But what we always argue is that those expenses are already being borne. They're being borne by the neighbors, the residents, the downstream folks, future generations. The damage is being done. So that's the Pollution Control Board. I think at the state level, we just lack the political will to do something about it, which is why a watchdog organization like ours is good to constantly be putting the pressure on, but the public needs to be involved too and say, listen, this is not fair that these rules are on the books and they're being able to get away with it. And really, with the industry mine operation, they know that this is a long process, and they're just, they have a couple months left to extract the coal at the site, and they're just, hurrying along and trying to get the coal out because that's their source of income. And then, we'll see what comes of the enforcement action, but that's after the fact of after they've already been able to complete their project. It's really frustrating, but you have to start somewhere. You have to start by sometimes a lawsuit and say, okay, we're going to get going on this, knowing that maybe 6 years later is when something will actually come of it. And it's, if we had some really landmark cases, it would send a flag out to the industry also that they're not going to allow this anymore. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened enough.
And the regulators just work for the state. It's a good old boy network kind of thing, and then nobody calls anybody in. Is that what happened? Or you can't say?
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I think is important to understand about mine operations is a lot of their discharges are precipitation driven, and a lot of these sites are only required to monitor once a month or once per quarter, and they get to. This is what always blows people's minds, but it's the only way the system works in anywhere is that it's self-monitoring. So they're given this permit. You're supposed to meet X, concentration of mercury or manganese at this site, and they collect the sample and they report to the industry whether they're in compliance. We don't have the state system in place to do anything else. So there should be a checks and balances, and there is, where they send inspectors out, and sometimes they'll do some paired sampling. But if you're looking at an operator that only has to sample 6 times a year, they're not going to choose to sample right after the big rainstorm. So what we see sometimes in the streams is not reflected by what's in the paperwork and what's submitted, because I would think it's pretty easy to show. And so then that's where you look at the industry mine case, you're like, wow, 621 violations. That says it's really bad. If they can't even pick the right time, to collect their samples. So And then we also, I mean, in some of these areas is where we have members and we have people that know to call us and say, listen, I was driving by and the stream was running orange, or we saw them dumping something there. And that's like, that is a lot, these mine operations are huge, and it's not something we can't trespass. And unless you can, do an aerial flyover, or you have neighbors, or you have workers that are calling you, there's a big buffer that prevents you from really seeing what's going on to some of these sites. So that's where having those eyes and ears telling us is really helpful.
I have a question. I think you do great and important work. I'm just curious where your financing comes from. What keeps you going?
So we are member and donor supported, and we're grant supported. So we have members that give annual dues or monthly dues. We have donors that largely value our work and will give larger money, sometimes for broad support of our organization, sometimes to specific campaigns. But then a lot of our work is funded by foundations. So my work specifically is funded by Rockefeller Family Fund, consortium of, well, it's actually a consortium of funders that are working on climate change issues. And they are working on issues related to the coal industry, obviously. We have did I say Grand Victoria? Grand Victoria Foundation. We have the McKnight Foundation out of Minneapolis, and they support a lot of our Mississippi River work. Lumpkin Family Foundation out of Coles County works on some of our East Central Illinois issues. So foundations that care about clean water, improving capacity. We do a lot of capacity building, so helping to support people on the ground or smaller organizations so that we aren't doing everything. The other people are able to advocate for their, they know how to read the permits, they know what the rules and regs are, they know how to organize a citizens group. So sometimes our funding is either on a specific issue or just the roles that we play. Oh. Okay.
It seems to me that the only solution for this, and I've been studying it in my home county for some time, they have a group fighting it. But it seems to me the only solutions we have is to try to, we're working very hard to keep the water clean and to keep the coal mines. You didn't mention they mine underneath the farmland and are destroying the farmland.
Yep.
We have some of the richest land in the country, in the world probably, in Illinois. But 2/3 of that has coal under it. And I think looking ahead, we have to support windmills, we have to support solar energy, and we've got to get somebody to stop the coal mines. I mean, we go to the legislature, we go to the EPA, we go everywhere, and they go ahead and mine without the permits, they go ahead and do things, and they tell everybody there's going to be jobs, and then they bring in other people to do the jobs, and they're shipping the coal off to China anyway, from under Illinois farmland. Now, it's pretty frustrating to see that happening. Whatever they're pulling out of the ground, they're shipping to China, and we don't get the benefit of that anyway. And we've been fighting some 4 or 5 years in Montgomery County, and
Yes.
I have farmland down there. God help me. Long time family farmland. And even in the drought, my bottom land yielded better than I ever expected it to. But anyway, they call it scrub land. The coal miners call that scrub land. But anyway, I think we just have to support these other methods of getting power. We can't let this go on. And that cracking of the thing to get the gas out even.
Yep.
It's caused earthquakes in Texas. And do we want a nice earthquake here, or maybe who knows, a volcano in Illinois?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned subsidence because really, and we're working with this with a group called Citizens Against Longwall Mining in Montgomery County, Macoupin County, where longwall mining is. Longwall mining is where you take out a whole panel of coal. You're not leaving pillars. What's proposed in Vermilion is room and pillar. We're taking out a room of coal, leaving a pillar, taking out a room. And the idea is that those pillars support. Eventually they will fail and subsidence will happen. What happens with the long walls, they take out this whole panel, and as the miner is continuing, the land is just falling. If you're taking 6 feet of coal out, it's falling 6 feet down.
6 to 8 feet, it's going to just go down
Yep.
like a big earthquake. the
And-
farmland does. And it breaks tiles, it breaks, tiling that drains the land, it breaks everything up, it breaks buildings up and cracks the foundations of houses and other things.
Yep.
But they're not stopped, they're continuing. They were mining, digging that mine out without the permits, even though you go to the EPA and state agencies. It's very frustrating.
Well, so longwall mining is, actually, after this, I'm going to a national longwall strategy meeting about this, because just like with hydraulic fracturing, you have this technology that has outpaced the regulations. And longwall mining, our surface mining rules are what's being applied, but they have nothing to do with the longwall mining itself. And the damage is left. And we have an existing economy in Illinois that's strong, which is agriculture, and it's really pitting one economy against, one type of economy against another.
And I am glad to see the solar thing going in at the University Park, that little patch, they're gonna put solar things on, because you don't need much land sometimes for quite a great deal of energy.
We're in a period of great transition, but it's going to take some research dollars, and it's going to take probably some financial support of these industries to make that transition.
We need to wrap things up, I think. Is there one more?
I know you've had a question.
Sorry.
Well, you pointed out Vermilion County. Have they strengthened their zoning laws at all, or are they fairly weak?
They don't have zoning regulations in Vermilion.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, that's a real problem. And in fact, the county board doesn't feel like they can do anything about that, because, I would argue that there are things that they can do in terms of requiring, putting protections in place, requiring studies be done in advance of the project, the proposed mine moving forward, but they don't have zoning regulations. And even though that is prime farmland, and you have, actually the way we learned about that mine is from a Farm Bureau meeting, because they were the first ones to know that that their farmers were being approached about selling their mineral rights.
I would think they'd want to, strengthen their zoning, that it would,
Yeah.
not have it happen again in another area.
It's a lot of work, and until there's that red flag, it goes up, and when that red flag goes up, it's too late. So it's this constant, where do you? So many of us in state government, local government, are responding to, things that are right in front of our face instead of thinking proactively, and that's a big challenge for communities. So,